In just 15 minutes, I would like to review a little bit the emerging countries. And when we are talking about the emerging countries, I mean, it's a good name, the BRICS, no? Sounds really good, BRICS, really sound. We have the Brazil, Russia, India, and China. A lot of people put together with the BRICS, Mexico and Indonesia. These are the future. They are supposed to bring the growth to the country this year and the future years. But we have to have in mind some points that they are quite relevant. If you remember the 90s, during the 90s, everyone has to go to South Korea, has to go to Thailand, has to go to Indonesia. It's really important that we know that all those countries default. The BRICS are completely different, but it's true that we have to be aware of some situation that we are seeing just right now in 2013, and it's really likely that they are going to happen also in the future. First of all is that the GDP growth forecast for 2014 showed that the famous BRICS are decreasing a little bit. I mean, saying that China is going from 7.5 to 7 doesn't look a big problem when we were talking that the European Union is only going to grow 1%. But it's true that they have been growing like that during the last 20 years, and that means that for them it's a problem, a decrease in the growth. And this is something that we have to watch because this is something new. We have been really accustomed in the last year to having a huge growth there, and the problem is changing a little bit. Why? Because as I said before, everyone is talking about selling. The problem is who is buying. If Europe is not buying, if the US is going to have a growth of 1.5, where they are going to be selling these big economies? The second thing that is really important is these supply constraints. When we talk about supply constraints, we are talking about what is happening with the salaries in China. Oh, this is risk. But what happened with the salaries in China? And suddenly we realize that some companies are moving from China to Vietnam, that this is really important. I mean, the salaries are increasing. But if you see, for example, the green line is the consumption in the BRICS. And we are seeing that internal consumption, that should be the biggest difference between the BRICS and the Asian countries of the 90s. The big thing is that in the last year, it has been maintained, hasn't grown. That is quite important. What about the investment? The investment is the blue line. Exactly the same. We have seen that, for example, there was a growth during the 2010, 2011. But suddenly we realize that the consumption and the investment in the last year, in this year, is not growing in the same path that it used to be. Another thing that is quite important to have in mind in the BRICS, it's when we talk about, for example, what is happening with the financial weakness. The financial weakness means that, for example, I said before, there are a lot of people that complain about the euro. They say we have to leave the euro because we are really expensive when we are trying to sell. If you look at this graph, what we are able to see is the depreciation of local currencies regarding the euro. So, for example, it's true that, for example, if Brazil has had a depreciation of 8.7 during 2013, means that they have been more competitive if they export to the US. If you are producing in Brazil, you had a depreciation in the real, so you are able to increase your exports to the US. But one of the things that you have to have in mind is that these countries have the debt in US dollars. So if these countries have the debt in US dollars and they have to repay the huge amount of loans in US dollars, it's a problem if the local currencies, like in India, depreciate a 14%, because that means that the burden of the debt has increased a 14% this year. And this is something that we have to have in mind. Why? Because, for example, in the other graph, what we see, for example, this orange line is the current account. And one thing that we have said before is that those countries usually have a surplus in the current account. What does it mean? That usually they have a deficit in the financial account. That is, there are a lot of European economies, European companies that they are investing there. As you see, the current account is decreasing very heavily in the BRICS lately. So one of the things that could happen is that in the future, in the near future, instead of receiving money, they are going to have to allocate the money outside. And this is going to be a differentiation for the BRICS that they have been huge receivers of foreign investment from Portugal companies for sure. What about the situation in some of these biggest economies? I mean, India is a huge country. It's really important in services. And one thing that is really important is that today they have what is called the twin deficit. What is the twin deficit? They have a deficit in the current account and they have a huge government deficit. If you, it's quite obvious, but if you're in this situation, you need that people lend to you very heavily. You need lenders. Who is lending money to India? For example, Portuguese banks, American banks, and so on. But if you realize the previous slide, the local currency has been depreciated 14%. So that means that the burden of the debt in India has grown very heavily in the last 2 years. And this is really important and something to look after. People are concerned when they go to India because they see that, for example, it's complicated to invest there. It's true that there is a lot of, red tape, bureaucracy, but apart of that, one of the things, if you have, for example, a contract with the Indian government, that for sure is a sound economy, but you have to look after that. Another issue also, for sure, is that what they are importing. And one of the things, we were saying before that Portugal is selling a lot of oil. Okay, you are selling oil. And for example, India is importing 33% of the imports are oil. Regarding the data, it was 17% just 10 years ago. That means if you are buying oil and once again your local currency is being depreciated against the US dollar, once again you are having a problem with the current account. And this is something that we have to look after very carefully. What about Brazil? Well, Brazil, you have the Coface magazine that has been delivered in this conference, and we have a special on Brazil, and you have these pictures in that magazine. And one thing that is important, they always say that Brazil is the future. Today it looks like they are not the future anymore. Perhaps Mr. Lula and Dilma Rousseff, they did a great job in the last 11 years. But the true thing is that one of the things that we are seeing is that they have a huge problem with infrastructures. And what about the infrastructure? Why they are so important? Anyone in this room that has visited Sao Paulo knows that it takes 4 or 5 hours to get to the airport. This is not logical when we are talking about a country that is supposed today to deliver a huge amount of growth to a lot of exporters there. You have to invest inside. We were talking, the previous speaker was talking about the kind of investment that we have done in Europe. In Spain, we are experts to have airports that they have no planes at all. One thing that you have is really important to look after in Brazil, from the Soccer World Cup to the Olympic game, is what they are going to do with the public investment. If it's going to be easier to export there, to work there, because it's true that it's a huge market, but today they have a really important lack of infrastructures. Regarding China, what is the main concern that we have in China? Mainly the completely lack of information. It's true that today, we move from producing in China. 10 years ago, you produce in China and you sell to the US or to Germany or who knows. Now the issue is to sell in China. When you try to obtain information of Chinese corporates or Chinese banks, you see that it's really, really difficult to obtain this kind of data. Why we are concerned a little bit inside of Coface, for example, about the leverage. About the leverage of the corporates, about the leverage of the government, because there is very few data in China. And one of the things that we expect, a lot of institutions expect, that there is a lot of credit. The credit is going through the corporates and through the government. This is good for them. But one of the things that we have to look after is to try to avoid a bubble in China in the near years. So if you look at, this is the slide that you have seen previously regarding the emerging markets, the developed economies, and this is regarding the emerging markets. If you remember, Spain and Portugal, for example, they were classified B. And you see that suddenly, this is September 2013, you see that there is a lot of A3, A4, even B, that is Hungary, for example, not regarding a country that is in the center of Europe. What is happening regarding the risk? Regarding the risk, we are positives when we are talking about the foreign payments that Brazil, India, and China, they are doing. We are perhaps a little bit more concerned about the payments in Russia. And I'm sure that if here there is a Portuguese exporter that has been trading in Russia, we'll have seen that the payment terms, they are a little bit more late than, for example, in Brazil, China, and India. What is important for you if you are working in emerging economies? What is this? This is what is the rating of Coface. Coface is double AB. minus AA. And I guess it's really important today when you trade and when you do business in Brazil or in China to look after what is the rating of the local partners that you are having there. I will tell you that, for example, regarding Chinese banks, there is, the rating that most of Chinese banks is below even BBB. So this is a problem if you are doing business there. And also, one of the things that you have to have in mind is we think there is a change in the tendency of the terms of payment. When you were dealing with Spain or you were trading with France or with Italy, you got paid by a bank transfer. And suddenly, everyone is dealing with letter of credits. This is a slide of the International Chamber of Commerce. It's really important to know the International Chamber of Commerce. Some people think that the Chamber of Commerce are places that you can learn English. You can do a lot of things in the Chamber of Commerce, and even you have something that is called the International Chamber of Commerce. These guys that they rule, for example, and they manage the letter of credits, they say that 44% of exports and imports today are made by letter of credits. In my opinion, I don't know if you share it, there are some companies that they are made to use letter of credits, and for another companies it's completely impossible to use a letter of credit, because if the importer asks for 2 copies, you will send 1. If it's asked for anything, you will never fulfill the obligation that the importer does. The good thing about this Global Risk Trade Finance 2011 inform that was made by the International Chamber of Commerce says that when you are doing trade with letter of credits, the non-payments that you are going to have in this operation is really low, like 7 per thousand. So that means that if you trade with letter of credit, it's true that it's more expensive, but also it's more safe for you, it will be sound for you. But you have to be well advised and work with a good bank and know what is happening there. That is quite important for you. So finally, what we think in Coface is life are cycles. In Europe, in Portugal, in Spain, we are thinking that we have had really bad times the last 40 years. But if you think about it, this is a cover of the economies of it was before summer, in June, and they are saying that the Chinese are partying like in 1793. But if you think about it, the World Marco Polo trip, 500 years ago, Marco Polo went to China. China was a big economy. The only thing is that we forgot about it, but they always have been there. I don't know if you wonder what these kids, what they are playing with. But they are playing with Deutschmarks. This picture is of 1923 in Germany. They are not playing with cards. They are playing with Deutschmarks. It's really important to know what happened in Germany in 23, 24. The Weimar Republic, in order to understand why they are so obsessed with inflation. Nowadays you have the Bundestag, and this is great, and this is a really nice building to see. This picture, I have always, it gives a lot of impact to me, because this lady has 57 years. It looks, it looks like 57 and it's only 27. 27 is with the 3 kids. And this is a famous photo, immigrant woman in the US in 1929. So that was the big depression in the US in 1929. Today we are facing the biggest economy, that is Wall Street, and this is really important. So that was then and this is now. So the situation is where we are now and where we are going to be in just 5-10 years. But as you see, the countries change, and looks like they change for better. The true thing is that the risks are near to us, and this is important, because this is, for example, the Laiki Bank is a Cyprus bank. So, these kind of pictures were taken in Argentina, they were taken in Brazil, and they were taken in Russia, and now they are taken in Europe. This is quite new for us. But this is something that happened. The thing is that we have to move on, because we think in Coface that this time, this crisis is really different. Why we say that it's really different? If you think about it, the green line is the growth of GDP of the world since 1970. So if you don't remember 2009, this is fantastic, because as you see, in the last 40 years, 2009 was the only year that the world GDP decreased. That was a really bad one. We start to grow again, and what we are seeing is that in 2013, the situation is that we have a growth quite similar to 2012. Because there is a credit situation here. We have the price of the money, we have the lowest interest rates of the last 70 years in the US, in Europe, and in Japan. but the credit is not arriving to the corporates. It's not getting to the general public. And this is the situation that is quite new. We have a crisis that we will have to solve in 2014 for sure. This is a map, I don't know if you have seen before, but this is a map of the IMF. It's quite obvious because if you think about it, the countries in red, they are going to grow less than zero in 2013. It's quite obvious which are the countries in red, no? For sure. There are just 8, and we are in one of them. The situation is that the countries in blue are going to grow regarding the IMF between 4 and 6 in 2013, and as we have said before, in 2014. So the big challenge that you have for 2014 is that you have to work in the blue countries, not in the red ones, because the growth is not going to come in 2014 for the red countries. One last good idea is that regarding, once again, the IMF, if you see this line, regarding the IMF, looks like the price of oil, later on before we were talking about the price of oil, is going to decrease like a 5% for the next year. So if you're exporting goods, I guess it will be a good idea if the price of oil decrease for 2014. I insist that a lot of people complain regarding the euro, and it's true that many times if you are selling in euros, I mean, we have a strong currency. But think about it, we don't have oil. I mean, Portugal have oil, but a lot of countries in Europe, we don't have oil, we have to buy it. And luckily, we pay in dollars. So if the change is 1.23, for us it's a good idea, because if the currency, if the US dollar appreciates, that amount that we have to pay to buy the oil, it will be a difficult situation to us. I finish with this sentence that I like. That sentence was made by the president of the Banco Exterior de España, that he always says that no hay exportación si no hay financiación, y no hay financiación si no hay seguro. Now you are going to work in emerging markets. You are working already in emerging markets, and you have to give 120 days, 150 days. You even work in Cuba 360 days, so you have to give credit. And there is no credit if there is no insurance. At the end, you need the insurance not because you expect not to be paid. It's because you need the credit to the buyer. Thanks a lot.